A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes, as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. Today, we are finishing part 1 of Dark Age. I believe that is up through chapter 17. Or page like 143, I think, in the hardcover first edition. Something like that. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Crossland. I moved. I'm in a new place.
You did.
There's a shit ton of echo in here. So Andrew is going to fucking hate me. But
oh no.
It's a good spot. We'll see how it actually turns out. I don't think there will be a lot of echo in the recording, but there's like a vent with the HVAC right above me, so that's fun. So I've got a different audio floor than usual, and it'll be a good time.
It might be a good time. I think that, if anything, Andrew will be briefly furious. We'll spend some time with you next week tuning, and then we'll continue on his quest for ultimate sound purity.
I just love throwing thorns in his side when it comes to that.
Do you throw thorns into people's sides? Is that how it works?
Well, I do. Them? I don't think most people do that, but there are probably better ways to do it. Like, I don't know, jabbing them in there, but long range thorns are, a thing.
Okay, so today is our, third episode covering Dark Age by Pierce Brown, and we're going to be tackling chapters 12 through 17. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're drinking. PJ, what are you having?
Well, Crossland, as I mentioned, I moved. By that, I mean I half moved. And part of what didn't move was my liquor collection. So I have a beer. It's a Volkshopper. Which is a Vienna lager from Portage Brewing Company. Where are they from? Walker, Minnesota. But recently, a couple years ago, their brewery burned down. So they've been having a hell of a time, but they're on the spring back, I guess. Do awesome stuff. It's a really, really great beer. So happy to support them, and I love Vienna lagers. So I'm happy to have that. I do not have anything following that up, technically, but I did just open another beer because, I don't know, we've been prepping for this episode for like an hour and a half because, once again, Tim jumped in and started chatting with us. So I've got Hop Circles Exhibit B from Blackstack. Just kind of as a...
Nice. To talk about... Go ahead.
Oh, I'm using this as like the beer or the drink that I cheers any dead people with. So there's going to be quite a few of those.
Yes, there are definitely quite a few of those this week. And just to mention the Tim thing, if you aren't a member of our Patreon, you might want to join if you want to learn more about the Steam Deck in the near future, because he is an absolutely massive advocate, and I would be shocked if he didn't worm that into either a conversation or a full bonus podcast episode on the podcast that we share, Speculative Knowledge. It's only on the Patreon.
Correct.
So feels imminent to me at this point.
Yeah, that's going to happen. There's no way that doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way.
Yeah.
Right.
What have you got?
I am having a drink that was also voted on and submitted by our patrons inside of our Discord as well. So I am having an El Presidente. A little bit of a spin on it, just a small spin. As opposed to using grenadine, I actually use cherry extract in the El Presidente. So for those of you who don't know, it's white rum. It is a little bit of triple sec, some Blanc vermouth, and then generally a bar spoon of grenadine, so not a whole lot, just enough to give it kind of a back flavor. So a little bit of spin on that is just a bar spoon of cherry extract. And I would say, if I were to remake this cocktail, I would add just like a dash of simple syrup. Cherry extract is not as sweet as grenadine is, and so like just a little bit of sweet backing would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but all told, it tastes more like a martini. So it's also very much in that flavor crowd and an orange twist garnish. So
in that case, maybe the lack of sugar works out for it. If it drinks more like a martini now.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think about it. It feels less like an El Presidente, which is sort of like an upclass version of a rum drink meant to stand up to like a martini, but have like a tiny bit of a sweet back. It's not a whole lot. But yeah, I still really dig it. Still really like it. The only other thing I would change is I would drink it out of a coupe glass instead of my lowball. Yeah, but
I need to get
here I am.
I need to get some coupe glasses. Coupe?
Yeah.
Is it coupe or coupe?
I don't know. Don't we call the cars coupes, but we call the glasses coupes because no one's consistent at all?
Well, who would want to be consistent in a time like this?
Consistent in a time like this. Back to the Bo Burnham special, always. And then to follow that up, I'm having a Highland Brewing Company, which is out of Asheville. High Pines Imperial IPA. Very straightforward. It's good. It's citrusy. It's got some blueberry and the pininess that I'd kind of expect. All in all, it's like a 7. It's good.
Awesome.
6, 7, something like that. 6.5.
I've taken a few sips of this Vienna lager. It is very good.
I'm jealous because I would love a really good, refreshing beer after this cocktail. Like every sip I take of the cocktail is like, it's good, but it's like a martini. And then like taking a sip of the beer is like, oh God,
yeah,
these flavor profiles do not mesh at all.
Viennas are always so interesting for me because they're simultaneously really complex and flavorful, but also refreshing, strangely. Like they're deeper, darker flavors that come through, but it's still just crisp and somehow light. I love it. I fucking love it.
Yeah, it sounds delicious. With that, let's get into last week's predictions. So we've got a couple to talk about here.
Oh boy, do we.
One, I wanted to bring this one back up. We had actually technically answered it last week, I think. The question was, what is Operation Tartar Sauce? And we kind of knew what it was. But this week, we got to really see it and see some of the things that even you talked about. And you said those engines will be used to create a tidal wave, which forces will ride into battle. And you're wrong, but you're not entirely wrong.
There is a tidal wave, and they did ride the storm into battle. Explicitly in those terms, they were described as riding the storm into battle. I feel like I'm more right than wrong.
Your sentence here that you yourself wrote says those engines will be used to create a tidal wave, comma, which the forces will ride into battle. Not that they would ride the storm into battle, but that they would ride the tidal wave. I'm going with you're more wrong than right, but I would say that everyone, again, in our No PJ Zone Discord, was freaking the fuck out because they're like, what? What?
As soon as tidal wave came up in this section, I'm like, oh, I wonder how many people were like freaking out about me saying tidal wave in the last episode.
It's a fun little metagame commentary for me because other people get to react to shit when they hear it, like I react to stuff, especially when it doesn't pay off for a while and like everyone freaks out about it. It's great.
Is it even better is it better or worse when I forget about my prediction?
I don't think that anyone else really forgets your predictions except for you.
Okay, so, it is just me. All right.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure most of the rest of us keep with it.
Fair enough.
Obviously, I do, as best as I can.
Well, yep.
All right, next one here. Does this skirmish end before the end of the next section? You said no, and I kind of want your thoughts. Is it over?
It's unclear. It's mostly over, and I genuinely believe this is the last we'll hear of any of the conflicts, so effectively, yes, I think it's over.
Okay.
But
all right.
That we ended a section. I should have known this. I should have taken this into consideration. This is the end of part 1.
Yep.
Like, it makes sense that the conflict would be over, but that was not in my mind when I answered and asked that question, because I wrote that myself. I also felt I felt funny by calling it a skirmish, but it feels kind of on brand now that Darrow just called the entire like platoon that Lysander was with a brief resistance.
Yeah, we brush with light resistance or
light
something
resistance,
like that.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, I don't feel that far off calling it a skirmish.
Yeah. Yeah. What's a battle for Darrow versus a death march for someone else are two very different things.
Yeah.
Could not agree more. Yeah, so you get to take that drink. And then the final one here is, in this battle section, who lives, who dies, who tells their story.
I didn't write that last part. That was you.
Hamilton. Yeah, right. I know. So you wanted to talk through?
Yeah, so I ran through a bunch of them. So I said Rona dies. which is wrong, so that's 1 for me. Lysander dies, which is wrong, 2 for me. Alexander lives, wrong? Unclear. I don't know how to call that one. Kind of assumed dead, right?
Yeah, I mean, assumptively he drowned.
Should we just call that? But it's not explicitly stated, right? We'll circle back to that. Sure. Thraxa lives. That's correct. That's 1 for you. Ajax lives. That's correct. That's 2 for you. Seraphina dies. That's correct. That's 3 for you. Atlas lives. That's correct. So that's 4 for you. Atalantia lives. Unclear. Simply because it's not stated one way or the other. Orion lives. Wrong. That's 3 for me. Pytha dies. Wrong. 4 for me. Lyria dies. Unclear.
I can't believe you thought that like Lyria would get resolved here. Like, we're going to introduce her and make her have a brain aneurysm, which is what you put down within anyway.
What did I write? I wrote, we get a brief glimpse into the life of Lyria, and she has a sudden aneurysm induced by torture and dies. So, oof, that didn't happen yet.
Not
so
yet.
At the moment, we're 4 each, excluding the unclear ones. And Atalantia is not addressed in this book, or in this section. Doesn't come up in this section, so I'm cool with just kind of ignoring that one. Same with Lyria. But Alexander, what do we call that?
What I'm going to say is we just push. We'll just hold it over. When and if the question gets answered, it'll get answered. Otherwise, it'll be at the end of the book. Or maybe the end of fucking next book. Who fucking knows?
Well, I explicitly said this is going to be for the next section, so we didn't have to push things over.
Well, then what do you think happened to Alexander?
I think he fucking died.
Okay, then it sounds like you drink.
Yep. All right, so 5 for me, 4 for you.
Yep. All right. Sweet. Cheers.
Cheers. We're probably going to cut this out because it's just going to be us slurping for a little bit.
I'm drinking a strong cocktail, of which I poured a double of because I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be real good. It's going to be, and it is good. I don't want to, this is not a bad cocktail, but I probably didn't need a double because I forgot that it was all liquor.
Yeah,
it's
so
getting tastier as I go, though.
I'm excited to find out when Lyria died.
Real quick, there's one other thing here. You also said Darrow lives, but loses all the other Howlers except Callaway and has to live with that weight.
I did. That's there. We counted this out.
The remaining Howlers are Severo, Screwface. The remaining original Howlers are Severo, Screwface, Clown, Pebble.
That's it.
And that's it? Yeah. Screwface, Clown. Yeah, just the 4. Right.
Yep.
So, you said all Howlers. I feel like that's the mistake here.
That is... All right. How many Howlers are there?
A number. I'm just going to say you just take 1.
Those could have been some pretty high stakes if you had ruled as individuals, but...
Been a dick about it, right? All right. So with that, let's get into the chapters. We start off in Lysander's perspective with Chapter 12, White Golems. So the opening page, I think, from Lysander is a fantastic one that colors a picture of a fresh soldier being marched to war. Like mentioned by Pytha previously, he's got to earn the title of Iron Gold, and I don't think there exists a world where he's prepared for this exact situation. He is clearly not prepared for the actual brutality and kind of the coldness of war. And that coldness is reflected directly in his prose. I know a lot of people dislike Lysander, but his character is absolutely brilliantly written, regardless of your feelings about him as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's really any dispute that he's a well-written character. This almost comes off to me as a coming-of-age story, sort of similar to the way that it was for Darrow for the first 2 books, but it's a lot more accelerated, and it's kind of fucked up. It's kind of a fucked up coming-of-age story, you know?
Totally. And I think, actually, to keep the Red Rising comparisons and the coming-of-age point rolling, it doesn't get less grim from here, especially as Ajax commits a war crime. And I bring this up because I think it'll make sense in sort of context with what you're pointing to in terms of the older books. So the quote here, the sense of certainty and purpose that brought me here is fading. I feel like a boy from a crowd who thought he could tame lions by stepping in the cage with him. Seraphina is fine in the cage. I wanted to use this little section to bring exactly what you just brought up, that most of these golds have obviously passed through the Institute of some kind or a gauntlet of another kind, but Lysander hasn't earned that peerless scar. He hasn't earned any kind of combat experience. What do you think this says about the way that Golds, and even like Darrow himself, was taught brutality from kind of the POV, and how it kind of became normal, I think, for us?
So just addressing Lysander himself at the moment, he feels and seems completely like unprepared and out of place. Because he is. That's exactly what he is. He has been a scholar and a ward for his entire life. He hasn't been trained for battle like this. And while the institutes are pretty brutal and unforgiving and even lethal at times, they provide a level of callousness to the horrifying reality of war. And I think it's good in this moment that Lysander is actually kind of realizing that. And if he were to really just kind of blindly believe that he was ready for this, he'd be in a world of hurt, you know? He'd be in fucking trouble. So him realizing that, like, shit, like, I'm kind of out of my depth. And he doesn't say that explicitly, but he kind of shows it through his actions and through his just kind of unease with what's going on. It means he's at least aware enough to understand that he's got to be fucking careful.
Oh yeah, and there's absolutely no question of that to me as we start thinking about the place that Lysander kind of takes in the rest of this section that we read here, right? Like, he kind of doubles down on a lot of these thoughts, and he is out of his depth. But I think what's interesting is, in a lot of ways, Lysander, at the very least, starts to act as opposed to just talk a little bit, which I think is a good thing for him. Yeah. One other component here as well that I found really interesting in terms of the sort of what Ajax does, killing all of those children. Kalendora replies after Lysander points out that it's a war crime, is that it's only a crime if there is a court. And oh boy, that's some shit.
If a tree falls in a forest, did you commit a war crime?
Maybe, but if no one's around to judge it, does it matter? So, I mean, I think that in another way, this is almost a different lens onto the victors go the spoils, because in reality, like, if you defeat the other side, you're probably not going to be tried for your war crimes.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to try you?
Yeah.
I guess a just government, but...
The society isn't just. We know that.
What government is just? Well, give an example. There isn't one.
There's an argument within this series that at the very least the Republic is a just government.
It's not.
It's not entirely, and it's not without its faults, but it's more just on average than it isn't.
More not horrible.
Well, one might say less.
One might say less horrible.
Less horrible, yes.
I'm going to go with more not horrible.
Fair enough.
It's not.
Fair
It's
enough.
a fucking terrible.
Sometimes I just have to let you have things as opposed to saying anything else. Kalendora, though, proves herself to be very, very wise throughout this section. I think that she also is like a fantastic add to the story. I love the discussion that she has with Lysander about war. We already mentioned that it's only a crime if there's a court, of course, but she also says cruelty is necessary, yet cruelty is a thermal runaway. And I think that is a brilliant quote. I think that this entire section is stuffed with brilliant quotes, but wow, what a critical lens to view war through.
Yeah, it's almost using cruelty as a tool, you know, and it's necessary, as she says, but understanding that it can be used as a tool while not being completely sucked into the idea of being cruel is something that's kind of lacking from the rest of the story. It's kind of refreshing to see somebody point that out and somebody really not necessarily show restraint, but give reason as to why they don't show restraint in certain moments.
Yeah, like when Atlas recommends anything or does anything.
I don't think he's the right example for this.
No, I think that he's totally restrained. Fully restrained.
Yep, he is an upstanding citizen of the worlds.
Not a weird whisper of anything weird from behind his weird mask doing weird things. Mm-hmm. Yep, weird baby faces. So there's an argument to be had about whether or not Atlas has really gone down the route of thermal runaway, as saying basically like the chain reaction or the explosion that might happen from like a nuclear bomb continuing to feed itself, right, as it perpetuates, I believe is kind of the discussion here, right?
Yeah, you've got to be careful
Use it like a tool.
using it, because if you use it recklessly, it will blow up in your face.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Which I think is kind of a good kind of metaphor for the way that the society treated all the other colors.
I mean, think about it like gasoline. It can be harnessed and used as an engine to propel something forward with restraint and with...
Dude, I just huff gasoline. Well, I don't know any other use for gasoline.
I mean, I was a dumb child. I was a very dumb child, and
I'm sitting
my
here in the
neighbors
closet.
and I had a very fun time. You are sitting in the closet right now. Absolutely, you are. But we had a very
with a
fun
can
time
of gasoline.
taking gasoline, putting a little bit of gasoline in a Dixie cup, lighting it on fire, and hitting it with golf clubs.
Wow.
That makes just a big fireball. It's a lot of fun, but
don't try that at home, kids.
don't do that. Please.
You've already been given your warning on the front end of this podcast, but I have to reiterate it.
Exactly.
That said, wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'd do it again.
I bet. I'm probably better at it now, you know? I'd probably hit it further.
We would also just shoot it with airsoft guns.
That seems bad.
It created like spurts of flaming liquid.
Okay, so then, before we expose any other war crimes that PJ's committed...
That's not illegal. It's not advisable, but it's not illegal.
I don't know.
I don't technically know that either. But I can't imagine it's illegal explicitly.
I would go so far as to maybe it might even be a state law. Like that seems like something that would be written in a state law, like a property law.
Dixie cups with golf clubs? Is that the law?
No, the law would probably have something to do with actually lighting the gasoline on fire.
Well, I mean, but that's irrelevant.
In a similar way, I don't think you're allowed to possess Molotov cocktails, and that's basically the same thing.
There was no rags lit on fire in our...
No, you just lit the fucking thing on fire. All right, point being, we're introduced to Roan T. Flavinius, and what a man he is. Like a real man's man. Shake you on the shoulder. Now, I really like Roan, and I think that he's a very honorable man, of course, and his whole thing about the blood, and the conversation with him is just fantastic in a lot of different ways. And even Lysander's reflection on the only Greys that are even close to him in terms of overall skill are the Nakamuras, one of course of whom is dead, and the other being Holiday.
So he's very close to a dead dude, is what you're saying.
Well, in terms of skill, but yeah, I mean, it was Aja that killed him. What'd you make of him and Julia Albalona's termination of his contract for Lysander and that kind of political ball?
So, as far as him in general, it's kind of interesting to see another non-gold be on the level of gold, sort of like Quicksilver was.
Sure.
He's still around, right?
Yep.
I can't imagine he's still kind of well regarded within gold circles, but he was for a long time. As far as the Julia Au Bologna, sorry, got to get the ow in there.
Ow, Bologna.
It's kind of interesting how much his connection to the Bolognas, even if it's been terminated, is going to fuck things up for Lysander and his standing with the rest of the people that he's running with at the moment,
Yeah, I think what's even interesting to add is how did Julia acquire or get this information, right? How did it make it back to her? Did she hear about Cassius and sort of his sacrifice? And is this a play there? There are a lot of questions kind of raised in terms of her involvement in a way as well. I think that feeds into what you're saying.
I'm guessing that she is not on strictly no speaking terms with the Rim. I could see her and Dido being in regular contact with each other.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything passed between the Rim and the Core for the most part for, the better part of the decade, but there were obviously a couple of things like the messages that Dido got from the Ophian Guild that happened in Iron Gold that was mentioned, so there's clearly maybe some passing of information, but it seems very, very, very infrequent at best.
But recently, it could be more frequent.
Yeah, more recently, sure.
Yeah. I'm talking any sort of information that's happened recently. I could see Dido and Julia being pen pals, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you're sending messages across the solar system, pen pal is probably the way to think about it.
Yeah.
And then we get to the Hypercanes, which are, I mean, we're going to spend a lot of time discussing over the course of this week because they're fucking everywhere. But I love the little line that Lysander here has. Grandmother, you left landmines everywhere. And boy, did she leave some fucking landmines here.
Yeah. There's the, so not long after that, or maybe right around that quote, there's the conversation where Lysander divulges that information that the storm gods are there, and the people are surprised. And it's kind of insane to me that they'd be surprised, and it's insane to Lysander as well, that they would be surprised that the person that launched the burning of Rhea would have contingency plans basically everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And that's kind of, again, that is kind of a shocking thing. And again, another brilliant writing thing on Lysander's point, from Lysander's point being like, you guys being shocked is hilarious because boy, oh boy, you don't know all the shit that I know. And I've got a photographic memory, except for some little weird things that I don't remember about my mom. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I can't help but agree with you that I'm shocked that they're shocked, but also I'm not shocked because that's the type of thing that like you earn so much buy-in from a population over time potentially that they don't think it would ever be them for whatever reason.
My government would never do that to me.
Jesus. All right, with that, the storm.
I'm not gonna elaborate, but. Yeah.
The storm absolutely decimated the force heading for Hyperion, pulling the Ripwings out of the sky, flinging men and women to their deaths. And the quote here, and all at once, the mission that took a month to plan, a half a year to prepare, one that was to be executed by men and women who've made a vocation of war, comes apart with no explanation except that the Reaper is sharing our planet and that my family is a line of paranoid tyrants. And I love that little bit of like the fact that his grandmother fucked this up for them from the grave is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost apocalyptic. Like if you were standing there as like just a soldier in the army and you just get your entire battalion gets obliterated by a sandstorm or a hurricane or fucking whatever hits you. Mm-hmm. Like that's an act of God, right? Like that's all you're thinking. Like this is an apocalypse. This is not natural, but
there are some silvers somewhere that run insurance companies that are totally rewriting the clauses on their contracts or double checking to make sure that they accounted for hypercanes from storm gods, like for sure.
Yeah. And explicitly, like, outlining hypercanes from storm gods versus regular hypercanes. Like,
yeah. Or an active god, or the Reaper, or we are not paying insurance on all of your people that died. And or
I mean, maybe they start selling Reaper insurance.
It's very expensive and does not pay out easily.
Nope. You got to fight for that one.
Instead, perhaps a bounty would be better. But I totally interrupted you, and I apologize for that. You were saying it was apocalyptic and that it's a terrifying sight to behold and witness.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to be like just a normal person within the army and understand what was going through their mind when that hit, if anything was, other than like rubble.
You said I want to be, and I said where the people are really quietly into my microphone because I didn't want to interrupt you again. But,
oh my God.
my brain is on total tangent mode today.
Oh, this is going to be a great episode for that to happen because it's not like anything happened here. Like this is a pretty
nothing
weak
important,
sauce,
nothing big,
pretty weak sauce section.
Not at all. Very, very mild. Not a whole lot happening.
Hey, you want to talk about currency for like 45 minutes?
So then the group splits in two, right after this. One to take the storm god down, and the other to trudge through as best they can to Heliopolis. Serafino, Lysander, Kalendora, and Roan head that way, while Ajax and the rest of the Leopard Legion continue on to Heliopolis.
Do you want to know about like the one lesson that I've always learned in D&D? Splitting the party is always a good idea. So I'm in for it. I think they made the right choice here.
I was going to say that Scooby-Doo taught me that splitting the gang is always a good move.
Yep, exactly. Like double the distance. They've got more ground to cover. It's all good. That's how
you can go in all directions.
I think they should split
you can go in
more.
So many more directions.
Every person should go a different way.
No one would die that way.
No, of course not.
No, not at all. But what an
idiots.
exciting way to end the chapter. Yeah, fucking idiots. For sure. For sure. With that, we move into chapter 13, Darrow, the Plains of Caduceus. So this is a really short chapter. I think it's 2 or 3 pages, but it is some of the best writing in this book so far, I think. It is the most poetic chapter, I think, by far, as he describes the Drachenjagers walking over the fields, the plains, and stomping on the flowers and painting them gold, and then later that being smashed and painted red. And there's so much here that's brilliant, including the very first line, which is, "The door of my trap slams closed. The storm is here." And fuck this chapter, dude.
Boy.
I love it.
Boy, is the storm here, man. It's a fucking monster of a storm. Even beyond just the actual physical storms that they've conjured, the storm of the war that they're waging is intense.
I don't know actively what to say about this chapter in a number of ways. Something that I did want to point out is Caduceus is the name of the medical staff, Hermes staff, right? So if you've seen that word before, that's where the staff with the snakes wrapped around it being one of messages, and Hermes is also Mercury, so it makes sense that this is all kind of around that in a larger way. But it is, ooh boy, Harold's Wanderstaff. So, but I really don't know what to say about the rest of this chapter. I can't pick it apart without just absolutely loving each individual line. The Drachenjagers destroying things, the 4 Alpha Omega nukes fired, and sort of Darrow's whole manifestation of desolation that happens in this chapter, on top of a beautiful, beautiful canvas of the environment that they're fighting on and over. It's nuts.
So one thing that I always have a tough time with this book, and this series in general, is scale, especially when it comes to warfare. So having them explain that there's 5,000 Drachenjagers and each of them is 40 meters tall kind of helps with that sense of scale. Like because of the way that we're interacting with Darrow and the people immediately around him, it feels like a small task force instead of a fucking army. And this helps kind of make that scale make more sense. So
I think that that's something that this book does heroically well versus some of the other books, because a lot of the other books have felt like small armies, unless it's the ship battles, in which they get a little bit more descriptive. But you're 100% correct. The 5,000 Drachenjagers earlier, the losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the sort of the
or millions,
the millions dead as the Red Reach explodes, all of the various people that are liquidated, and as they describe that, it just becomes such a grander space opera in the space of 170 pages. So no, we're not even there. It's like 150 pages right now.
I think, and I don't know if this is exactly where this is coming from, but I think one of the main problems is it hasn't changed the way it was written as far as combat and stuff goes from the first book at the Institute, where it's 30 dudes fighting 30 dudes. It's written in the same way from the same perspective. So it feels like a small, just strike force, but he's commanding an army, and that doesn't translate quite as well. But this section kind of helps that. There are definitely moments earlier in this book and in other books that it feels bigger and more grand. But in general, the style that a lot of these conflicts are written in feel the same as they were in the first book, and that kind of gets confusing just in my imagination of how things are going, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I'm not expecting other people to feel that way. It's just, I don't know. That's me.
The literature newbie over here.
Ayo.
Final note of this chapter, of course, with Alexander Darrow, is the execution of Scorpio Alvodum. And it's just kind of a fantastic footnote on the chapter. For 100 years of rape, genocide, enslavement of your fellow man, I sentence you to the mud. And I see the parallel here that's similar and obvious in a lot of ways to the quote that Karnas said forever ago, and that's clearly been ingrained in Darrow as he's crawled out of the mud so many times, and this sort of idea of crawling out of the mud being a frequent one between Darrow and Lyria. of, fly so high in mud you lie, how dare you crawl out, and in the same kind of way, he's putting that badness back on them in a proper way here.
I think "I sentenced you to the mud" is an even better quote. Like, it doesn't rhyme, but it feels cooler. I don't know. I like the way that this went.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's fucking ridiculous. Do you have any other thoughts in this chapter? This is one of my favorite chapters in the book. I just literally don't. It's poetic. The whole thing is poetry. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right. With that, chapter 14, Lysander into the storm. In the midst of their storm walk, Lysander and crew, the Scooby Gang as they were, run into Cicero Outvotum and his squadron of legionnaires. He's got kind of the familiar air of golden stink about him, and he almost talks like Lysander might. I think I pinpointed it when I was reading a little bit later this week in the reading, and it came to me that he reminds me of Tactus in a lot of ways in the way that he kind of talks. It's an interesting picture, of course, given that we just witnessed the death of his father, and he's talking as though his father could potentially win the battle, even though he's kind of resigned himself that that's unlikely.
I made this note. Somehow he seems even more pretentious than Lysander. Like, if you were to create a cartoon of what it meant to be gold within gold society, that's kind of what it seems like. It's just ridiculous how flowery his wording is, and just kind of over the top in that sense conversationally. But I'm sure he's a fine dude other than that, but that's kind of all we get from him in the moment.
I'm with you in that. I think that Cicero has the right to be an interesting character here, and he starts to kind of define himself as something that could develop into something interesting, but he isn't a whole lot more than in a way, a douchebag at the end of all this, but that's okay. We'll get there eventually.
Yeah, you said it, not me.
And I compared him with Tactus. Isn't that apt for me? Finally, they arrive at the eye of the storm underneath the storm god. The creatures of the desert live here, hiding from its terrifying vortex. And my God, what a kind of sight this whole thing is. The sort of different gravity wells and the spinning around. Lysander also fixate on Darrow's decision here, and the likelihood that his decision to raise the storm gods would kill millions. And he even has an understanding of that. But just the moral quandary that Lysander is dealing with, too, as it relates to Darrow, is an interesting one. Did you have any thoughts about that? Sort of his moral judgment of Darrow?
Man, I don't know if I can really break down any moral judgments of Darrow right now, because I don't think he has the ability to break down any moral judgments of Darrow. Darrow himself, I mean. Because through this chapter, he kind of evolves that, He kind of evolves that, meaning Lysander evolves his opinion of Darrow, or Darrow evolves himself? Darrow evolves his own opinion of himself, in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we'll get into that, I'm sure, in later chapters.
We will definitely talk about that in a bit. While preparing to storm the storm god, the terrible violence begins just a moment before they're about to take off and go. And just the quote here, and then the entire top half of Seraphina's star shell disappears as a rail slug the size of a man rips Romulus's daughter clean in half. My commands stick in the base of my throat as the legs of the mech teeter and collapse sideways, spilling her intestines out the top. And just like that, baby, the morality and fatality of this war rears its mortality, rather, not morality. Mortality and fatality of this war rears its ugly head as the Raws lose another to a war for the core.
This is what I love about this chapter and kind of this whole book. Some of our biggest characters, the ones that we're following closely, can just kind of die quickly and unceremoniously, just like that. I don't know.
Yeah, this book,
it makes it feel so much more real, I guess, because it's not going to always be a long, drawn-out, dramatic end to a character. Sometimes it's just like, they got hit by a fucking railgun. All right.
Yeah, and it's not like we didn't have... Here's what I think this book improves upon over previous books, right? So we talked about some of the considered OG Howlers from the Institute, Harpy and Rotback. Harpy dies in what is effectively in Iron Rain. You know, it's a very similar moment of war. If I remember correctly, I think it's Harpy. Very similar moment of war. But the difference is we didn't really know Harpy. We had no real picture. But we've spent a whole fucking book with Seraphina talking about her, having Lysander ponder feelings for this thing. This whole catch a predator motif that you've been running with is now ended unceremoniously.
Yeah, all those notes are
although
still,
I guess
they've been passed on to the chief inspectors, and Lysander is fucking going down. I can assure you.
Well, it just moves on to Kalendora, right? Like, it's just, that's the hots are just going there, right?
She's older, though, right?
Right. But it's still, the whole, like, aunt thing doesn't get you? He described her like an aunt. You know, it's like, oh.
What are the laws?
Uh-oh. Okay, well, with that... This is a big, okay, well, with that episode. you just keep pushing those boundaries, PJ. It's... Jesus. So I totally agree with you. I can't help but think and like love the story because it does treat the characters like people. I think I said it originally in like the middle of Morningstar, and then I reiterated it in Iron Gold. But this series really kind of, in a way, when it starts to be able to just kill main characters in various contexts, in sort of the reality of war and warlike situations, it starts to feel more and more like it's got that Game of Thrones energy to it, where anyone's head is on the table at any time.
Yeah. But even then, those characters are meaningful and grand, I guess. Not necessarily meaningful, but grand. They're not usually just kind of suddenly gone and then unaddressed after that. You know? Like, their deaths linger a little bit within the story a lot of the time.
Well, I guess just to respond to that, do you think this death isn't going to linger?
It hasn't immediately.
Well, I think that's still because we're in the bowels of war, right? Like, we gotta... I mean, Lysander, there's a hard cut here in terms of what, like, Lysander does.
It might come back. I don't think it'll linger even after the war. I think it'll take until the time when any sort of word gets to the Rim and back, which is going to be months of waiting.
I mean, or just to Diomedes even. But, of course, he might have also resigned himself that this was a possibility, and, you know, there's always that possible reaction from Diomedes, but...
Yeah. You're right, though. That was a little short-sighted because it's not part of this section, so I just kind of glossed over the fact that it could still be a major point later on. So. Yeah,
and I'm not saying necessarily that it is. I was just trying to address the fact that we haven't had time to even live outside of action, really, for this week.
You are correct. Relish in that comment, because I don't give it out lightly to you specifically.
Well, okay. Well, let me just take a sip of my drink here and light up a cigarette real quick.
I mean, let's take a drink for Seraphina.
Oh, true. Seraphina did die. Another drink for Seraphina. Big rip. Favorite Seraphina moment?
When she came through the secret rapist door in Lysander's room.
Good point. All right.
I mean, the totally innocent, innocuous secret passageway that went to the guest bedroom that Seraphina knew about.
Clearly meant for mistresses. Not that Romulus had any, but for weaker types. Yeah, okay. So for me, I think my favorite moment with Seraphina was probably all the way back when she was rescued on the Vindobona. I think that her initial appearance is this sort of furious golden child with, like, encompassed with rage is a fantastic one. Then the secondary one is all the way back in Morningstar when Darrow meets her for the first time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That's another great moment. But I don't know if that counts because she is effectively a different character. She's the same person, but she is a different character.
Well, as different of a character as we were when we were children, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I don't consider me the same person as I was when I was a child.
No, but it was still your childhood. Like, it was still you.
Sure.
You know? You were learning how to behave.
Yeah.
Or how not to behave.
I didn't do that.
You didn't absorb anything from your childhood. Chapter 15, Darrow Tyche. It is excellent here, though, to see like Darrow's remark about Tyche and how this compares to the beginning of Iron Gold when he remarks that Lorne adored the city and like cried walking the streets and whatnot. It's as though now, through the work of liberation, he understands that that beauty as he walks through the streets. and kind of gets to see and witness that. However, circumstances have changed pretty dramatically as this city is about to die.
I mean, at this point in the story, what isn't about to die? You know?
Oh my God!
Everything is about to die.
I totally agree with you. It is so true. Yep. Everything is on the table here. I was trying to like dodge around shit, but like literally everything is on the table. This is, even at the end of this chapter, this is the closest we've seen Darrow to death. Like it is, and it's unresolved.
That we almost thought, like, we were left thinking he might have fucking died at the end of book 2.
That's true.
Like, it was completely plausible that he didn't fucking survive the end of Golden Sun. So I don't know if this is the closest to death that he's been, but it's not sunshine and rainbows. He's in a little bit of a dire situation.
Yeah. The point being, I totally agree with you with what isn't going to die at this point. It's just, it is all on the table. It is brutal. And the wave of which you predicted comes to pass, not as a tool for reprisal in the way that you thought, but you were definitely onto something. And it turned out to be far more destructive as it literally washes up against the mountain, drowns millions. Darrow realizes sort of the weight of what's happening and the degree to which his order has been exceeded. And it's all just fucking gnarly. Good work.
Yeah, fucking called it.
Kind of. As addressed at the beginning of the show, you kind of called it. I'm not...
All right, so you use the word called it, right?
I said kind of.
No, but you said called it.
I did, and then
That's
I corrected
all I need.
myself.
That's all I need.
I want to read just like a couple of descriptions of the wave and storm here, because again, I think that not only has Pierce Brown leveled up the combat, leveled up the war, increased the sort of the stakes of everything brilliantly inside of this first 145 pages or what have you, but he has also changed his prose game in a dramatic way. His prose is entirely fresh. It still obviously is written very similar, but this does feel like, I mean, we're on book 5. It's his 5th book that he's ever written. He's written one other short story ever, and his prose feels sharp here. So I want to read some of those descriptions. Huge shadowy forms descend into the storm, their eldritch contours suggested by spasms of lightning. I fucking love that. You know eldritch, right? The term eldritch?
Nope.
So the term eldritch would be used...
I don't know the origin of it.
It would generally be used to describe things of a like Lovecraftian nature, like tentacles and sort of this otherworldly thing reaching out. And so the idea that there are these shadowy forms flying and the lightning is the only thing that creates their shadows and like shows them for what they are is kind of very, very Lovecraftian, where like you don't actually see the thing, you just see kind of the vague definition of the thing. Okay. Anyway, there's that. So, they stand no chance. As I watch, the sea ripples like a single organism, and from the gray obscurity of the storm comes a wave that would make a European stop and stare. The tidal wave is a kilometer tall. It buckles the first 20 blocks of the city's oceanfront and sweeps uphill towards the mountains, only stopped by elevation just short of the Harper's Plaza. Oh, wow.
Oh, God, that's such an insanely big wave. So after reading this, I looked up the actual like size of the record-breaking wave in Earth, like on Earth. And as far as what's been recorded, it was 1958 in Alaska. I can't remember the bay. I think it starts with an L. But that was the biggest wave. It was 1,700 feet, which is just over half a kilometer. So this is twice that size. Ooh. Twice the biggest recorded tsunami on Earth. Fucking crazy.
Wow. Yeah. So that, just to give that scale context, that is absolutely, like, how tall is a kilometer? And I'm not taking feet, I'm thinking like building floor size.
A lot. It's tall. It's pretty fucking tall, I'd say.
Wow, super funny. I Googled this question. Someone asked it on Quora, and you can actually find the question. And the question was asked by someone who had read this book, this story, and asked how tall a 1 kilometer wave would be. This is fucking amazing. It's 464 stories tall. Jesus Christ.
464 stories. What's the the tallest building in the U.S.?
To put it into context, the world's tallest building, the Dubai's Burj Khalifa, is 41 stories shy of that. So the wave is larger than the biggest building in the world.
Which is an absurd building, by the way.
Yeah,
that's why I asked for the tallest one in the U.S., because the Dubai stuff is just bonkers.
Right.
And irrelevant for the most part.
I mean, it's absolutely nuts. That's insane. Like, I actually didn't even have a grasp of how tall that was until that moment. Like, I was like, oh, a kilometer. Like, a kilometer's a long way up. Of course, duh. And it's really big. It's double the size of the largest wave on Earth. That's crazy. You put it into a building perspective, and you're like, oh, so that's how it washes up against a fucking mountainside. All right, we spent a lot of time talking about the wave, but it's so necessary. It's so fucking big. It cannot be understated how big this wave is. So the absolute devastation of this scene is a fantastic tactical advantage for Darrow, of course, but as Alexander rightfully points out, it is an absolute genocide for those along the coasts. And I think that we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we continue onward, but this feels like maybe the first of a couple of moments where Darrow kind of questions his war decision a little bit. And I think that we start to see a shift here potentially. And I think that this is kind of maybe the first moment. It's not a full decision yet, but this is the first sort of inkling that maybe there's a change that Darrow admits needs to happen in himself.
Yeah. He, specifically within this section, he definitely goes through a change. And this seems to be the first moment where that starts to happen. Starts to make its way into his brain.
Yeah.
The focus on, or the change of focus from defeating the enemy to preserving your army.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to extend the metaphor just a little bit. And obviously, like, he speaks directly about his army and sort of the choices there a little bit later. We'll talk about that in just a minute or two after we get over a really big emotional hurdle. But I think that in large part, if we look back on Iron Gold, we can see this character of whom is obsessed with the destruction of the enemy, who is obsessed with the death of the Ash Lord at all costs. And here, in the midst of war, Darrow grapples with a very different question and decides that instead it's maybe not about that. It's maybe there's a little bit more. And we'll talk about that more in a second, but I want to just pose that sort of out there right now to imagine and think about.
Well, I think at least a part of it in this scenario is he's not necessarily straight up fighting Atalantia. His goal isn't to kill Atalantia in this combat right now, right?
Well,
I mean,
okay.
It would be if she was there, and she might be somewhere that we can't see, but we haven't had any sort of contact with where she might be at the moment, right?
Correct. And I think I agree with you in premise of what you're saying. However, I think the later bit where he kind of talks about the decision to fight for his army versus fighting against Atalantia, he like looks over the plains imaginarily and sees her on the other side and like thinks that he knows where she is. And that's when he kind of like makes the decision, if that makes sense. Okay. So we don't know for sure that she's there, but he's pretty confident that he knows where he would have to go and chooses otherwise. So not 100%. I agree with you for the most part. I think it's just he has a theory in his brain that he would, do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
it makes sense.
Oh man, we get to, I think, one of the hardest sections to read of this book so far. The scene in which we find Orion is one of utter devastation. As Darrow points this laser out through the clouds, this communication laser directly at the storm god. He gets a visage of all the other blues except for one, and Orion have died of cerebral brain overload and are just hemorrhaging. Their brains have hemorrhaged. Overload. Sperm. Brain overload. Summon more overlords. It's not even summon. It's what?
Spawn?
Spawn more overlords. Yep. Good one. But another one of the blues is sheeting blood from its nose, and the entire situation here is just dire. Orion, though, cannot be dissuaded, and she has pushed the limit to punish these Mercurians and to punish the society remnant as a whole. She was supposed to keep it at a single horizon with her blues, but they pushed the limits up to 2, 3, 4. 4 times the expected result in chaos is what we've experienced over the course of these last chapters, and that is what damage has been done to this whole thing. But there's just so much pain, I think, really visceral pain felt within this page and a half, especially Darrow having to pull the trigger to end her life himself, her body sliding down in the chair limp. I guess, what do you feel? How do you break that apart? How do you think about the whole moment with Orion?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to lie, this one hurt quite a bit. Yeah. She was such a good character, and she was one of the few people that seemed to actually understand Darrow, and that Darrow seemed to be open to. You know, like there aren't that many characters here that check those boxes. So clearly she'll be missed. Like I'm gonna fucking miss her. But at the same time, going back to this section specifically and the actions here, I'm kind of confused by it, because I was under the impression that blues in general kind of acted more robotically than humanly. So having a grudge and doing things just to hurt a person that you're fighting against seems a little bit out of character, you know?
Well, okay, so let's take that a step.
Okay.
And let's just break it down. I want to address exactly what you're saying. And I think that you're on the money for what I would consider a majority of blues. Blues have been trained to act that way in a large regard, but that's also why Darrow chose Orion, is because she didn't act that way. She didn't think that way.
She always thought logically, though.
Yeah, but I would argue by her own standards, she doesn't think that she's thinking illogically. And the reason I say that is specifically, and I'll read the quote here because I actually was going to pull this out and read this because I decided that it was important to the context of what we're talking about. He asks her you must turn off the engines, scale back the storm. Can you do that for me? She replies, they can't win with Venus alone, so I will take Mercury. And he replies, Orion, think of the army, think of the people. There's nearly 1 billion here. And she says, rats are complicit. Rational transaction. And I think that obviously the weight of the phrase from the Ash Lord and everything else being here, one inside of Darrow's life, and it's not as though Darrow told her that line. It's not as though Orion has any idea about that interaction that he had with the Ash Lord, but for him it carries a different weight because he hears that and he thinks about the way that the Ash Lord thinks about war, or thought about war before he died. And this is her moment where she can burn Rhea to stop the spread of the disease. And so she is choosing effectively to sacrifice all for the betterment of the cause.
Hearing that again in this context while we're talking about this, I'm on her side. I think she should have done it.
Well, I think she was doing it.
She was doing it. Like I think Darrow shouldn't have stopped her, is what I'm saying. Everybody on this planet's fucked anyway.
Yeah, and I guess like there's the whole like Blood of Empire Foundation, like bleeding for the Empire, or every empire is built on like a foundation of corpses, and like there's that whole like context that exists, and so I think that she also embraces that, but I don't think that would be good footing to walk forward with in a certain regard.
Do you think they're on good footing right now? Anybody in either army? Like everything is so on fire here. I don't know.
I mean, okay, so let's like, I really like, and we talked about this quote earlier, but the Kalendora quote of the thermal runaway, right? This is thermal runaway. This is not cruelty to win. This is not strategy. This is not a tool. This is thermal runaway.
Yeah. And
while I think that I'm with you on the fact that she's logical in thinking that this would solve the problem, and I think that, by all accounts, I don't disagree with it. I don't disagree with the fact that I think that it would solve the problem. I just also think that there are probably better methods. That said, that doesn't mean that's going to happen. That doesn't mean we have the resources.
So in that idea, what's a better method? By definition, what would be
killing
better?
a billion people.
More efficient? More humane?
Well, it's not more efficient because drowning the entire world is fairly efficient.
It's very efficient.
But it also kills Darrow as well. Not just Darrow. Let's not glorify a single life. But let's also step back a second and say killing a billion people for the salvation of the rest is still a lot. Like, we were upset at Darrow for the Dox of Ganymede and sort of the ends that
Some of us
accomplished,
were
which was a
upset
decade
with Darrow
apiece.
for the Dox of Ganymede.
Okay, I'm upset with Darrow for the Dox of Ganymede. I think the burning of Rhea is another great example of this, right? Like, this is just, instead of the burning of Rhea, this is the drowning of Mercury, and I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I think that Darrow was right to pull the switch and kill her, because I think in reality he sees a path out of this, and she refuses by all means to step down and like listen to orders. He is her superior, and while I think her rationality might have accomplished the end, I don't think it would have been a good stepping stone in any direction going forward, because you still have the Rim to contend with. You still have anyone in the air to contend with who didn't land on the planet. You know, like, you just consider Mercury a wash at that point. You move on to the next one if you're the Society Remnant with whatever else you have, or you regroup at Venus. You know, it doesn't fully solve the problem, but it does drown Mercury.
You're right.
It is a solution. I don't think it is the solution.
Yeah.
But I guess, what'd you make of Darrow having to pull the trigger himself and kill Orion?
I mean, I would have been really upset if anybody else would have done it. Like, I think he's the only one that realistically is able to make that decision, and it's a tough decision to make, but in his eyes and realistically in general, it's necessary, because it's gonna kill a lot of fucking people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in the world that it is going to mess shit up regardless. Like, the storm doesn't dissipate by the end of the story, like by the end of the section, for the most part.
I'm just excited to see the point of view that comes up in the next section, where it's a person on Mercury who didn't drown, but maybe should have if Orion had her way, that has intense animosity for Darrow and comes back and kills him. Like, I don't know, Orion could have fixed that.
Yeah, but Darrow would have died if Orion would have fixed that.
I don't think Darrow would have died.
I think he would have drowned. He's having a really tough time. So cheers to Orion for being the most important admiral and the second best pilot of the series.
Yeah. Cheers. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful blue.
As Darrow said, she was more of a myth than a person, even. Mm-hmm. Because she was so impossible to kill. I mean, and he had to do it by his own hand. Oh, man, there's just so much here. I could have an entire episode we could have an entire episode about all the people who have died here and talk about all this shit that, like, As though to interrupt our downtrodden and drowning city, a carved face but a familiar name returns. It's Screwface, a spy among the enemy, has made it back to his army. He delivers the news that we know. Ajax is making an attempt for Heliopolis.
Yes, he is. Screwface is one of 4 original Howlers remaining, correct? I think we talked about this at the beginning of the show, but this is what this came from, was us talking about this question and trying to count out who's all left. And it's Screwface, Pebble, Severo, and...
Clown. The worst parents are still alive, remember.
The worst parents are still alive.
Yes.
You know, somehow I think their kids are going to be, like, better adjusted than Pax.
Yeah, 100%. Because you know what their parents did? Their parents went back to their kids after they found out that they were abducted, except for Clown and Pebble's kid wasn't abducted. Yeah. Like, largely agree with you. It's fantastic to see Screwface back, I think, in a large attempt. And I think that this is actually a really important plot point that a lot of other authors, I think, would flub, right? Like, how do you get the news to a character so that he goes to the right place for the next scene? How do you get that information across to him? And this is so well foreshadowed and planted in the previous sections, and even in the previous book, talking about Screwface infiltrating. And like we mentioned briefly that there's something going on with Screwface. It's a great thing. I noticed that in this read. But then, after this sort of high note of the reuniting with Screw, we go back down because we can't spend too much time up. This is the Empire Strikes Back of books, so we got to get the shit beaten out of us here. Darrow breaks the news to those around him that Orion is dead and by his own hand. But Darrow does something I think that is very calculated here, and he says, I cannot afford to mourn, but then instead proceeds to go through an equation, a rational transaction, a callback to the words that both Orion speaks that we already discussed a little bit, as well as something that the Ash Lord brought up to him in the previous book. That's where his memory goes, is thinking about Rhea as a rational transaction, thinking about all of this war and all of this deceit as a rational transaction. And I think that this is a really interesting point here. He's even kind of like denied the request of the Acrosians, of Elend and of Alexander to go save people down below. And boy, does this feel like a cold move from the Reaper. But I think that this is also another acknowledgement point where we start to see Darrow come back in a way.
Yeah.
But it's cold right now, but it plants the seeds for the comeback that's about to happen.
Even for Darrow, it's a little insane how cold it is. We know that he knows what needs to be done, and I think we believe, and I think we know, if he had a choice, he would choose to save as many people as possible. That's kind of been a theme for him in general throughout all of the books.
Darrow's?
Yeah.
I mean, not really Iron Gold, but
I think
not really.
So. I think so, because everything that he's done, he felt like was the only option. And maybe that's a flaw of himself, thinking that this is the only option when maybe there were other options. But I think if he saw a path where people could be saved, he would take it. While also, like, specifically, a path where people would be saved while he's also maintaining military superiority.
Yeah, I think that's the important part here, right? We're about to talk about Lysander, who could have maintained his military superiority as he's not a leader, but the other folks, Kalendor and Roan, are leaders of the Society Remnant, and they absolutely could take off. And Cicero's like, why wouldn't you take off? And Lysander's like, I'm going to stand with the men, and I'm going to make sure that we do the right thing. I'm going to try to figure out a way to get them out of here. Compare that to this, and Darrow's unwilling to sacrifice these two knights that are with him to go save any lives whatsoever, because they're a tactical advantage, and he thinks about them as tactical pieces. Mm-hmm. And it's all a rational transaction to him, one where the drowned are going to drown no matter what, and he needs to keep the momentum going forward. He needs to keep the war engine churning and burning.
Right, exactly.
It's tough, but I think that we need to dig this hole, right, so that we can get to the emotional core of what we've been driving at for books now, right, which, again, I'm going to say it, that rational transaction. His internal reflection that comes shortly hereafter on when did this start? When did I become this person who made these sort of equations and this mathematical divide over life and all of these different things? And we've been talking about it for months, and it's so hard to pinpoint. And he puts everything into words that we poked at over the course of the last book. You know, we had this kind of large discussion about the Reaper versus Darrow, and he kind of interrogates that for himself. He actually interrogates it, I think, for himself for the first time. I let fear drive my hope away. I let war become me, and my men followed. Atalantia's army isn't worth mine. If I die, it should not be taking her life, but it should be saving theirs. And I think that, as we've said, this is a critical turning point for Darrow. And this time, I mean Darrow. This is a moment of reflection where he faces the Reaper, as we've discussed him head on, comes to realize that he's been horrifically wrong. He's made the wrong choices constantly, despite good intentions in the end. So he's been doing the wrong things for the right reason, sure. But this moment here on 121 feels like he is finally leveling his head after books and books of violence. What do you think?
I'm curious if it's enough, you know? If that's enough of a redemption, because truly, even though he's kind of realized what's been happening, it's not changing action. All it's changing is motivation. So
I think it changes action just a smidge, and I think that we addressed this a little bit earlier, but he's not going after Atalantia.
Later, but it's not right now.
Well, no, I think in the quote, he specifically says that Atalantia's army isn't worth mine. And so he's making the decision to not chase after Atalantia and to instead save the lives.
But he hasn't made that decision yet. Like he's made the decision of what he's going to do, and he's talked about the decision of what he might do in the future. But in the heat of the moment, he hasn't made that decision. And clearly, there's no heat of the moment after this, so that's hard to talk about. But
okay, so you don't. So then I want to clarify here. So you don't read his decision right now to instead go to Heliopolis from Tyche as him deciding to save the lives of his men? Because I think that is a decision.
Yep, it is. Yep, you're right. Yep, ignore me.
I'm just making sure. I feel you, because in the end, though, here's the real question: will Darrow maintain this sort of sense for his people? Will he maintain and continue actions that are saving lives as opposed to dispensing with them at the aim of victory?
I think it depends on who's on it, who's at his side when those decisions come to pass.
That's interesting.
Who
do you think is important for the positive decisions?
Rona and Severo.
Okay.
I think Rona and Severo are the only two.
I dig that. I really do, and I didn't mean to derail you. I just wanted to kind of pose the...
You didn't derail me. I needed a focus because I wasn't sure where I was going.
Sure. It is... I think that it is such a... It's such a change that we witness in Darrow's character from sort of the at any cost man that he was in Iron Gold to this moment where it's become about survival in a large way. And you might say that a cornered rat will always do something like this, which is another consideration here as well. But I think that Darrow is kind of wisening up in a way. Yeah.
For now. I don't know if that'll stick. We'll see.
I think that's the bigger question. I do agree with you. Will he stay this way? So a little bit of the Rona Alexander flash goes noticed here as well. There's sort of this flash of interesting, I don't know whether I'd call it sexual tension or not, but it's some sort of jokey Bondy moment here that I like. Flirtatiousness, yeah, that's probably the way to put it. It's a brief but great moment, and Scriven ending it by saying "see ya, kid" to Rona is just a fun way, and one that's made even more pivotal as we see kind of this decision manifest in Darrow of letting the Arcosians go to save lives. It's as though he has turned this corner, and he's like, you know what, go ahead. And he is kind of, as we've said, Darrow even assumes at the end of this that they're likely dead, and that they died for that decision to go save lives. But at the same time, he reflects on the potential loss, but he doesn't think it was a bad decision. It was a noble one in a large way.
Right.
So I just want to address the last part of the question that I had asked as well here, just so that we don't skip over it. What do you make of Alex's decision to reject the Peerless Scar?
So I think there are a few options as far as reasoning why. I think the most obvious one, and I'm not sure if it's the one that's true, but the most obvious one that comes to my mind is the idea that the Peerless Scar kind of embodies the people that they're fighting, it is the sigil, I guess, of the elite golds, and this is completely opposed to who they're fighting at the moment. And the other option,
I'll reiterate, that one is 100% my read.
Yeah, I think that's the right read on it, but I think there are other options.
Yeah.
And that kind of lies in the idea that his motivations are elsewhere. He's not doing this to earn a scar. He's doing this for other reasons, whether that be Darrow himself, whether that be Alexander himself. Whatever his reasons are, they are his own, and maybe that's not what he's going for, and doesn't want to muddy the waters of what his goals are and how he achieves them with receiving a Peerless Scar. So I don't know, but I think the one that makes the most sense is the fact that it doesn't align with who he's fighting for or what a scar stands for. That's where.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that There's a lot of depth to this decision. I don't think that it's one to be taken or even considered lightly in a number of ways. It's so interesting, too, because I think we've been talking a lot about juxtaposing Darrow and Lysander, but maybe even more apt is to compare Lysander and Alexander. I think that they're on very similar trajectories given their age, given their experiences. They end up being another interesting mirror, another interesting pair that kind of complement each other through the different POVs. One of complete honor through action, and one who believed that his words could be enough to stand in for action.
Yeah, circumvent the action.
Yeah. And obviously Lysander's learning that's not true. Kind of in a big way. So.
Right.
Yeah, they also make an interesting pair because Alexander is rejecting the scar that he's earned, and Lysander is actively trying to earn a scar in a way.
Right.
So the chapter ends with Darrow's usual dramatic flair. I turn with a heavy heart and head back to my men to lead them south toward the battle in the desert that will decide the fate of us all. And again, fuck, dude, what a section. What a chapter, what a book.
Man, like, what a fucking book. Yeah, it's certainly going to decide the fate of the mill. Like, it's 50-50. They win or they live or they die. Like, happens or it doesn't. 50-50.
I just got hardcore deja vu of you saying that, but I love it.
I'm sure I've said
totally
it before.
with you.
I'm sure I have.
No, I'm talking like this whole thing. But yeah. So chapter 16, Lysander, Rider of the Storm. The reflection of death right at the beginning of the chapter is really strong and evocative moment as it goes. The comparison of death between that of Cassius and Seraphina, I think, is a strong one. Lives cut short, their stories severed and ended by fate's cruel.
So this seems pretty on brand philosophy-wise. Like, this seems like a very stoic way to look at the deaths of two of your close friends. Doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, like, this is just more piling on to the idea of Lysander wanting to be as much like Lorne as possible, even when it comes to his thinking. But I think I think it makes sense. I think it's the right way to think about things. So, but maybe you and I are both biased in that sense.
I think the reflection is one that we could almost pin on Darrow back in like book 2. This feels very like Golden Sun Darrow in terms of reflecting on losing people. The war is obviously a lot more violent than the war that we experienced back then, but I think that this is very much a similar meditation on life and death.
Yeah.
And it is very stoic, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So we find out as well that Lysander did successfully take out the Storm God, albeit at the cost of many soldiers. And I found, particularly at the end of that, the note about when Roan is talking to him about kind of horses and the Sunblood is there lying on the ground. The fact that each Grey being issued a horse is just fascinating to me. It reminded me of the movie Kingsman, where the spies are issued dogs to protect and raise, and, asked to kill it or protect it. And, that's kind of whether or not they get into the Kingsmen. Roan sticking that knife in the head of the Sunblood, a particularly large horse, native and carved for Mercury, was a great moment of world building and mercy, I think, in a big way. I loved this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the story in general. I think the connection to Kingsman is what was running through my mind as well. What's more interesting to me is that there wasn't really a right or wrong decision when it came to killing the horse. It just kind of defined what position they would be placed in afterwards. So, like,
yeah,
the people that are ruthless enough and, like, feelingless enough, I guess, to go ahead and kill the fucking horse went on to be, like, the ruthless killers of the group. So I liked that was part of the test, and it wasn't a test. It was a placement exam, more or less.
Yeah, it is very interesting in that way. And those that have kind of the kinder hearts were actually put in charge of protecting the blood, as it was said, verbatim from the book. So I think that that's very interesting in kind of that context. And I think that it sort of builds out this world in which it builds out an inner circle around Lysander and the Loons that is one of protection, one of honor, one of duty to, and like, I don't know. It's tough to say precisely what it's pointing at, but it is pointing at sort of the placement, like you're mentioning, and sort of the heart to not kill something that you love is enough to say that it's unlikely that you will betray me.
Right. I think it's also kind of fun to to get into the situation where, like, all right, you're a total fucking sociopath, but we got a use for you. Like, come this way.
You are a Black Ops killer.
Yep, exactly.
What do you think they do to those Greys that like shot the foot of the horse? Like couldn't like kill it fully, but like maimed it on accident?
On accident or on purpose? On accident is a
like
completely
purpose
different
accident.
thing.
Like a weird emotional accident. You know, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to shoot. I meant to get it in the head and I shot in the foot. Because there are going to be those, you know? Like, what do you do with like a middling Grey?
Shoot him in the foot. I don't know.
shoot the Grey in the foot. Give him a limp.
Yeah.
Oh, no. It's so unfortunate.
It was unfortunate for the horse, too. So
True. Fair
know.
point.
Yeah.
Fair point. Oh, man. If only we had a character that had a nickname that was a horse.
Yeah. Too
Weird.
bad.
Weird. So Ajax abandoning Kalendora, Cicero, and Lysander after this quest to take the Storm God is a brilliant political twist of the knife from him in an attempt to end the bloodline of Lune. He quotes back a story from their grandfather, and it's got this just kind of like fantastic moment. Even previously, Darrow said that it was unfortunate that the killer, like Aja's place, was filled by a man with twice as much, the same sort of brutality in mind, but twice as ambitious. Like, that's a brilliant way of painting Ajax's character.
Yeah. Ajax is fucking crazy, man. I really like his character. I know this isn't like on track with your question. I don't know. I really like Ajax.
Yeah.
And man, I want more. I want more from him. I just want more from him. I think he's a bastard. Like, here's more moving things. My physical book is not with me right now. I read a little bit of it in person, but then I started moving and then did not get to like bring it to the to the new house from the apartment. So most of my reading was done in audiobook form for this. And then I listened through it a couple times. And after this sort of reveal from Ajax, every like interaction with him, there seems to be some little like subtle hints of like, this dude doesn't like Lysander. He really doesn't fucking like him. Like there's bad shit's gonna happen. Did you notice those?
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think especially in a reread, and this is something that like I didn't try to play into, but you get a sense of these sort of hostile looks that happen after they land more than before. There's still some sort of resentment that goes on, but when Lysander reveals himself and sort of immediately undermines Ajax's authority, it's almost as though that was the only thing that Ajax cared about. And it gives this really interesting, it paints this really interesting picture as far as Ajax and Lysander goes, that basically says Ajax has always sort of been very jealous of Lysander and his confidence and his bloodline and all of these kind of different things about him and sort of his birthplace and superiority just strictly by birth, which is interesting for a gold to hold over another gold when in fact the entire point of gold is that they hold it, they lord their birthright over all of the other colors. It's just so, it's an astonishing circle to be a part of. But Lysander specifically views him as a brother and kind of has this conflict that exists based on birthright. And I think that shows itself very apparently in the scene with Lysander, or with Atalantia, in the scene with Diomedes, and then a third time when it's revealed when Ronti Flavinius lands that, you know, he's immediately undermined just simply because of his birth, simply because of Lysander's birth, not because of his qualifications, which is an interesting and wild perspective to have too. I think that it's such a good character beat.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. It's so good. So Lysander's stance on staying with the men, I think, is something that Darrow would do in large part. We kind of talked about this earlier. Early Darrow would have done this. He would have stood with his men, and he would have chosen to kind of be there for them despite kind of the depleted batteries and the dire situation. He's coming to realize through reflection and his time on the Rim that the right thing to do here is to serve the men, just like Darrow has come to realize as well in these couple of pages. There's an interesting parallel here as they seem to cross metaphorical paths and sort of spiritual and war leader paths right before they cross physical ones.
Yeah. Trying to draw connections between Lysander and Darrow is becoming more and more interesting. Sometimes they seem super similar, sometimes they seem completely different, and just week to week and book to book kind of. I'm getting the feeling that they're both almost kind of converging on Lorne from two different directions.
Interesting.
Like Lorne is this ideal and this feared and capable just warrior and gentle, understanding philosopher. And we're kind of getting both Darrow and Lysander approaching those from different directions. Darrow from the warrior side and Lysander from the philosopher side, and understanding that there's the other side that needs to be embraced at the same time. As things go on, they almost seem sometimes more and more similar, which is kind of cool to see.
I think that is a fantastic point, and not one that I'd actually considered, that maybe they're both in their own ways converging on Lorne as sort of their grouping point. And it also makes sense because, I mean, Lysander even says he studied this man for the better part of his entire life, for half of his life. All he did, well, not half of his life, but if we considered like childhood.
More than any other man, I think is what he says.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. He has studied Darrow so much and has read, so much about him and has this like very deep and understanding of him. And so I think that I totally agree with you. I think that they are converging on Lorne for different points. I think to some degree Lysander is seeing Darrow as this opposite example of what he stands for, but also still understands him and believes in a lot of the same thing Darrow fundamentally or philosophically believes in, despite being diametrically opposed politically.
Right. Entirely.
Or morally. Yeah. Makes for a very complex story. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then like you throw Alexander into that mix and it all gets really complicated. Because Alexander kind of is, like, his denying of the scar makes me feel like he is closer to Lorne than even, Darrow and Lysander are in a way.
Without trying to be, though. That's kind of the difference.
No. And that's brilliant. That's...
He just naturally is like that.
Exactly. And that's what you want. You want the sort of like spiritual warrior king in a person. And I think that Alexander, before he drowned, was very much that way.
Maybe drowned.
But as I mentioned, they're about to cross physical paths, and they do. There's only a few words that reach us over the hill, and those words are heart beats like a drum, the crux being raised in the air, and hell is about to rain down on Lysander. But the Howlers have arrived. But from the other perspective, the Howlers are here, and they're going to run the fuck over Lysander and the society. And they do. And there are these brilliant moments, these brilliant kind of pushes from Lysander where they take aim and he's reading the situation. He's like, okay, they've got to be there. They're hiding in the shadows behind the Drakkenjagers and the dust that's being kicked up. Shoot there. And there's so much from the scene and this perspective of Darrow, this battle. But then Darrow arrives swirling like a god of death.
Darrow is a god of death. Like, he acts the part, but he is. He leaves a pile of bodies in his wake wherever he fucking goes. Like, he is ruthless. When it comes to actual battle, he is. I mean, I'm not going to try to like make up terms beyond what you already said. He is a god of death. It's fucking crazy to see. It's so much fun. I love it.
It is gnarly. It is absolutely gnarly, and I love it personally.
Mm-hmm.
It is in many ways. Just a fantastic moment in breath between all of this.
Right.
So as violence reaches for him, Darrow does not flinch like a man. He reaches like a covetous river. He pulls violence to him, drinks it into his current, and leaps around the battlefield with a seemingly mindless capriciousness. And by God, again, the prose that fucking Pierce Brown has crafted from different POVs, even in describing the motion in the ocean, is just so fucking good, dude. Yep, fucking wish I could write this way.
Yeah.
Also, I think a lot of people try to write this way and write it badly. For the record, let the record show. I think a lot of people try to write this way and they suck at it. Pierce Brown does something that I don't think anyone outside of fucking, like, he's a modern Shakespeare when stuff like this pops up.
Mm-hmm. How do you pronounce the last word you said?
Capriciousness.
What does that mean?
Yep. Capriciousness is a sort of impulsive, unpredictable form. It's kind of like, I would say that it's mostly characterized by being impulsive or unpredictable. So it kind of jumps and it moves as it will.
Okay.
So there's this capriciousness about him because he is kind of unpredictable.
That makes sense.
And that's why you have a string of adverbs here, which we know how I feel about adverbs, but seemingly mindless capriciousness. You could have just said with a capriciousness, right? But a seemingly mindless capriciousness also gives it this nice poetic weight, which is well done, well executed. I mean, I would not cut the adverb here.
It's just a lot more
adverbs, rather.
It's a lot more description that doesn't actually tell you anything. But
yeah, but at the same time, it kind of gives you a sense of like flow around the whole thing. And if you don't understand the word capricious, you can understand mindless, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Totally fair. In general, though, sort of the description of Darrow within this scene, moving around the battlefield, does this seem indicative of the Willow Way, or is this something completely different?
So I think that's really interesting. I think that it is. I mean, I think that it does fit in with the Willow Way, right? I don't think that it's a different style. I think that this actually harkens back to. I keep saying fucking harkens lately. I think that this calls Harkins. I'm gonna name like a character in a book's last name Harkins at this point, but. I think that the whole, as violence reaches for him, Darrow does not flinch like a man. He reaches like a covetous river, is kind of calling back to Aja and the way that Aja was described by Lorne, saying, do not fight a river and do not fight Aja in the same kind of way. And I think that this is sort of a verbal manifestation of the style in which Darrow cleaves through people.
Okay.
With the Willow Way.
That makes sense. Yep, I'm with you.
Oh man, what a thing. And this chapter ends in Lysander's horrified screams as half of his face burns under a star shell thruster, melting through his suit and bubbling up his skin and burning his face.
That's a pretty rough thing to happen to really anybody. So much for our beautiful boy.
Fair point. Our beautiful boys, right? We refer to Cassius and Lysander as our beautiful boys. Oh, no.
Yeah, one is in pieces and the other is a nacho. I don't
know. Oh, no. And I can perfectly imagine that. It's like nachos that you left in the microwave for a minute too long. Like, where it's just bubbling and black.
Yep.
Oh. Oh no. Good description, good call. I'm very upset about that, but also perfect. Good work. You know, and it kind of mirrors, we're about to move into Darrow's perspective, and I didn't actually think about this until right now, but like Lysander's pain and like change of his physical appearance from this war kind of mirrors Darrow's in a way as well, again, where Darrow is suffering from severe radiation and is bound to have his hair fall out and all kinds of physical poisoning. But before we get to that, I just want to mention that right now. But so chapter 17, Darrow, Heliopolis, I fucking love, and this is I think the most oft-cited section of the entire series are these moments back to back. The quote, "We brush away light resistance at the downed storm god," is hilarious. It's poignant. There's just this entire POV, this entire character's perspective, this entire person's perspective brushed aside to be no more than a small conflict in Darrow's eyes. And I think it's so interesting because we have literally witnessed Darrow kill hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands, over the course of this series. And to imagine them all as a POV that is experiencing this pain, now that we've seen it through Lysander's, is horrifying in a way. Yeah. He doesn't, like, he described that entire thing that we just went through, that we talked about for 25 minutes or whatever it was, as a line. A fucking line.
Yep. Man. As far as Darrow's, like, interaction with these, like, pieces of resistance against his movements, it really kind of feels like I'm just gonna sneak right through you kind of situation. Like,
oh my god.
Lysander barely hit the ground and Darrow was fucking gone. You know, like,
true.
It was for Darrow, it was light resistance.
Yeah, and fucking Kalendora, like, lost her arm, like, in the middle of all of that, and obviously Lysander ends up with his face being burned, and there's just this terrible, like, series of events from Lysander, but Darrow, like, barely recounts it. It makes you think of all the different times that Darrow has mentioned small things, like we kill a pack in the corridor, right? Like, there's a whole fucking scene there that has to happen that we just don't see. It makes you also go, okay, in the adaptation, it's going to be so much more violent. It's gotta be than the book reads,
so.
You know?
You would think so.
Yeah, provided it goes onto services and not Netflix, which would cancel it after the carving. Netflix would cancel it after the carving. Regardless, the radiation poisoning, which we were just talking about, the fact that they're experiencing this sort of, like, hair loss and the bubbling of his skin, and all of these different kind of exposures that have happened while they've been climbing over the Ladon in the wake of the Alpha Omega bombs that have been launched. It hurts, and the descriptions are definitely painful.
3.6 Röntgen. Not great, not terrible.
The fucking radiation poisoning. Jesus, man. When they finally make it through the Ladon, they arrive at Heliopolis, and it has fallen. Screwface runs ahead to scout as the entirety of Darrow's legion is slaughtered by men in the masks of child faces. Masked behind these faces. They're all, like, taking a breath even, and, like, popping open their cockpits for the first time in a day and a half, I think is what we learned. Like, it's been at least 24 hours since the battle started. So they're taking a breather while they prepare for the next move. And the fucking Fear Knights army bears down on them with their faceless masks, their child face masks, and murders the people directly in the cockpits, stabbing down, decapitating this entire legion, splitting the oranges, killing Felix Audon. Shout out to Felix Audon. We're taking a drink. Thank you for existing. Appreciate you. Sorry you died.
Sorry you died.
And we hear Atlas speak. We've been dreaming about this. Well, not dreaming, but we've been talking about this villain for weeks at this point. And he says, "You asked me a question long ago. It was on Mars before we lost her. You asked, what do I fear? I fear a man who believes in good, for he can excuse any evil." And that is, again, in a section, in just, like, the way that we've broken up these parts of these episodes, this is a brilliantly written 50 pages, 60 pages. And it is astonishing, the weight of that line. And it's not wholly original, right? But it is so good.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple different interpretations of this, and I'm curious what you think he actually means here. So does he mean that Darrow is the person that believes in good and therefore is kind of unhinged when it comes to evil? Or does he mean that he himself, the Fear Knight, believes in good and Darrow should fear him because of it? Because he'll do whatever to achieve it.
So ready for like a wild explanation of things that's going to dive into a couple of different topics?
Absolutely.
Because I think that this is, to me, this is a very important thing. But I think that this dives into, and I don't agree with the man's opinions for the most part, but I've studied a lot of philosophy, and a lot of early philosophers, of course, were theologians. So St. Thomas Aquinas talked a lot about the fear of spiritual evil or other temporal evil that exists, moral evil, and that like spiritual evil doesn't exclude sin, and it stretches in the distance as far as he goes. So what I think that this relates to as far as Thomas Aquinas goes as well is this idea that if you hold in your heart that whatever you're doing is good, you might forget what good means, and you might seek to accomplish your goals at whatever means it takes, which I think also sums up Darrow in Iron Gold, right? Like he is able to excuse the murdering of several low colors who hadn't even fired a shot or reared their heads at him, right? Just post the capture of Tharsis. There are so many people that like die in that section that don't necessarily need to. Low colors and even the golds. I don't know. They're like violence for violence's sake because you have good intentions is not a good thing, and I think that's what the Fear Knight is kind of pointing out here. And in all honesty, PJ, this is my favorite line in the entire series. This is my line because I think that it embodies that you can have the best of fucking intentions, but your intentions can also deliver you to the wrong means to attain your goal. And I think that Aquinas was back on this in the 1400s, and I think that Pierce Brown kind of, I don't know if he's trying to harken back to that. I know that he's classically trained better than I am for sure, but he is definitely calling that out here. It feels to me like he's calling out good old Summa Theologica or Summa Theologica, but I didn't have any of this in my notes, by the way, guys, just for the record. Like, I did not plan this conversation whatsoever. This is just something that I'm very into.
Right.
You asked the question, I answered. What do you make of the quote, I guess? I just delivered a diatribe of sorts.
You did. I guess that's the core of my question, is what does it mean? What direction does that go?
So let's take an example directly from the text right here in this section we're talking about. We had this conversation earlier about Orion and her justification of being able to kill the entire planet, right? Mm-hmm. And Orion, I think, believes in good and can excuse the evil that comes with taking 1 billion lives for the good of the cause.
Right.
I think that's a prime example.
That is. I agree with you entirely, and I think Darrow's actions completely apply to this question. But I also think that it could be entirely plausible that this is framed in such a way that Darrow is it's almost said in a means of intimidation, like, I believe in the good that the society brings, and you should fucking fear me for it.
Interesting.
Because it's not clear what he means in that.
So, okay, so I see what you're saying. When I read this when I think about it from Atlas's perspective here, my thought is he's looking at Darrow, and he knew Darrow before Darrow became the Reaper of Mars in the term of like a Sons of Ares operative, or the leader of the Sons of Ares. So he met him before that moment, and Atlas's view is one that is, how do I put this? Atlas himself, I think, because he's a Rimborn, and what we know of him, he doesn't believe that he's a good man. He knows that what he's doing is evil and vile, and he's doing it specifically to provoke a response. He's doing it specifically because it's tactical. He's doing it specifically, like even the trigger warning, the suggested rape of, well, actually the encouraged rape of Darrow by his 5 obsidians, all of that is to say that I don't think that Atlas believes that he's a good man. He doesn't believe in good. And thus he doesn't like even apply himself to his own quote in a way. Like he just totally escapes judgment by his own quote.
So I don't know if I necessarily agree with you there, because I don't think he believes he's doing good. But
Yeah,
I think
which is what I'm saying.
No, I know that's what you're saying. But I think it could still apply to his quote, because I think what he's saying is that he can excuse evil in the pursuit of good for a greater purpose.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Fear Knight is, and maybe
impaling the idea of the Reaper of Mars, physically and metaphorically, I suppose here,
yep,
is an evil act that, in his opinion and from his perspective, creates more good in the world, doesn't it?
I don't know that he believes that. And maybe this is something that we need to work out over more time with him.
Yeah,
but
I think so too. Because
part of the reason,
yeah, sorry,
I was just going to say part of it, and I'm sorry because I'm interrupting you, but part of the reason that I suggest this is just strictly because I think of him still, like, despite him being brought to the core and everything else in his youth and being sold off kind of that way, married to Aja and whatnot, I think that he still has, there are aspects of him that are clearly inspired from the Rim, which I think comes through in this quote. This is a very seemingly stoic quote. He just realizes instead that he is the evil force, I think. And so he embodies it. Mm-hmm. And maybe by your own reading, what that means is that maybe he also has by his own definition, maybe he fears himself. Like maybe he fears what he could be. Could he be worse than what he is?
Right.
It's an interesting question to pose, I think, with your addition to the question.
Yeah.
So sorry for interrupting you. My brain just went on a tangent.
No worries. It's understandable. Where I'm coming from with it is there a level of understanding of the evil that he's committing? I
think he is very aware.
He's aware, and does he believe that those actions are necessary in order to bring in more good into the world and into the society that he's living within?
I think that he thinks that they contribute to his survival. Okay. I don't think that he thinks that his survival is necessarily a good thing, but I think that...
I don't know if I get that from him.
Sure.
Simply because of I fear a man who believes in good, for he can excuse any evil. And
well, then again...
He is the Fear Knight. I think that he is trying to embody what he fears. And that's the read I got on it, at least.
Well, that's not bad. The other thing that I just thought of as well here to add into the perspective and add into the conversation is maybe he actually, unlike a lot of the rest of the society, acknowledges the fact that the golds hold this sort of superior power in place of authority over the lower colors. And so that maybe he recognizes that it's not a good thing, but that being in power ultimately is a good thing for him. And so he is one who is going to take advantage of the situation. I think not unlike Atalantia. I don't think Atalantia thinks that differently from that perspective. And so they kind of fit together in that way from a morality standpoint.
That makes sense.
But I think that this is very complex.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly complex.
Yeah, this line. Mm-hmm. As mentioned, I've been waiting to get here for a long fucking time, dude. I called you the other day and I said, I'm so glad that we finally made it to Dark Age and that we finally get to have kind of a full conversation about the series as it stands now. We're not quite there yet, of course. Please don't spoil PJ. I swear to God, I will cut I will cut you off on social media. That's what I'll do. That's a non-violent thing. Yes, I will cut your... That's so rude. Did you have other thoughts on the quote?
Rude. I don't think so.
We didn't address?
I think that we addressed everything.
I love it. I love this. So, but wow, does the Fear Knight deliver? I mean, Atlas Al-Ra, as we mentioned, orders the Obsidians and others to castrate Darrow, fuck him in the ravine, and feed him his own cock before slitting his throat. all the while he sits on a mound of sand and watches the death of the Reaper of Mars. He's not wearing armor. He's not wearing a star shell. He's just wearing a robe. The dude is a fucking maniac.
Yeah, that's a little insane. Just a little bit.
Yeah. This guy is up there.
Mm-hmm.
He's fuck wow. Like, this is bad Romulus, right? Like, this is what happens when you take those ideals and you corrupt them absolutely,
Right.
in a way.
Exactly.
Fuck. Any other thoughts on Atlas?
Not at the moment. I'm excited to see more.
I think the only thing we didn't mention or talk about at all was his specific mask that also guises his voice, which is interesting. I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to reiterate that it's important, but I think it's interesting that the Fear Knight understands that the unseen is more terrifying than the seen and understood. And so hiding behind this mask and also this guise that prevents him from his face from being known is horrifying.
Yeah.
Not using the term in any other way except for what it's intended for.
It is.
It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck, dude. So good. The villains in this book, man. But before Darrow is violated, Kalwe Zichar has returned with the Morning Star to collect his little debt. Midnight is here to save the day, singing the Reaper's little song, but with his own name. It's such a fantastic little moment. It sails over them, the gravity shadow lifting everything into the air for a brief zero-G fight that's so well coordinated and a ton of fun. And Darrow ain't dead yet.
Here comes Midnight McQueen. That's all that was running through my mind. It was Midnight McQueen.
All told, I absolutely love your read on this. I think that it's great.
Midnight McQueen.
Midnight McQueen, man.
That's not a great take on anything.
No,
it's a fucking joke.
I kind of, well, in a way, there's sort of like, I get this ka-chow nature from
ka-chow nature. Did you just say ka-chow nature in all seriousness?
I fucking did. The battle continues, Darrow flying over and dispatching enemy forces at will. It's got this fantastic kind of momentum. It's a great scene, him bouncing around like a rubber ball with seemingly unlimited momentum and force bouncing off each of the conflicts and kind of leaving his own imprint before he finally hits a wall and has a heart attack. He's been pumped up with 10 stems, 6 were enough to kill a horse. He's brought to rest in the Votum halls, injured and hurting very badly.
Yeah. Heart attacks are kind of a bitch, like, just in general. But yeah, I think this proves that he should have like laid off the salt shaker. Just be a little bit more like,
my God,
understanding of what you're putting in your body. You know,
are you suggesting that Darrow was killed by sodium?
I mean, you said killed, not me. But yes, effectively. Yes, that's what I'm arguing.
Darrow murdered by too many steaks and potatoes.
All right.
With salt
we
on it.
got to work on this like wording thing. Like, I'm okay with using killed by, but murdered is a little aggressive.
You're saying that salt can't murder people?
Yes, I am saying that salt can't murder people.
What do you mean? I'm just kidding. For the record. Your silence was enough there to pain me. So, with that, the last
what you didn't see
of the
was
week.
me like breathing heavily and just like head all the way back, staring at the ceiling.
It seems like a very us moment, especially to end on, right? Like this is a great point to wrap up the podcast. Oh, we've got one more question.
Oh, good.
Yep. And then to end this part, of course, Thraxa and the other remaining Howlers, Sans, Alexander, and Eland, as we said, who may have drowned,
maybe not,
walk in, maybe not, walk in and declare victory. And I think the victory cry of Thraxa is incredible. And the sort of moment when everyone charges into the room to let Darrow know is fantastic. The fact that Heliopolis is safe and the battle has been won is a fantastic moment after 140-something pages of absolute fucking mayhem.
Yeah. Well deserved. Well fought for. Well deserved. So good on you. Take advantage.
+1 to initiative. So,
perfect,
dude, Any other thoughts? Anything else you want to say about this week, this part?
Not specifically. No, I think we're good at the moment in that respect.
How'd you feel about this part?
Oh, so good. God, man. Does it stay like this? Does the writing stay like this? I know you can't answer that, but I want it to.
Oh, man. What I will tell you is that after reading Dark Age, it is a daunting task sometimes to pick up other books and expect the same sort of incredible shit. But then again, someone a long time ago wrote a thing about, it was a brief thing about the Game of Thrones and sort of how you can't constantly have red wedding moments. You have to earn them over time. Mm-hmm. And I think that right now, the only reason that we get to have this moment, this book, this section, is because we've built up enough good faith and enough good momentum and different plot pieces for the story to now fall together. And I think that that's why we are where we are now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That said, we move into your predictions. We've got a couple here to read through. So they're all yours. I'm going to let you read them to yourself and answer your own questions because I think that's fun for you to just talk to yourself for 4 minutes.
Yeah, let's do it. So, first question, is Alexander alive? And my answer to that is no. I think he succumbed to the Strom, or the storm, depending on who you are.
Can't believe you wrote it wrong while sober and then read it intentionally wrong.
No, I wrote it right. Well, I wrote it right while sober and then changed it to be intentionally wrong while sober and then said it incorrectly on purpose while intoxicated. So we are 4 for 4 at the moment.
Okay. All right. Fuck. Fine.
Does the Fear Knight make it out of the battlefield / off the planet? And no, I think he gets hunted down. I think Thraxa takes him down, honestly.
So you think he gets like captured? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Or does he get killed?
And murdered. Yeah, I think he gets kind of similar to Seraphina, just unceremoniously killed.
Sure.
What is the structure of the next part? Point of view / time / location changes. I think we will see an addition of point of views, small time jump for Darrow and Lysander because they've been on that planet on Mercury. So need a little bit of time to get to where they're going. And then overall, I think there will be still multiple locations that we'll be dealing with.
Cool. All right. Any other thoughts, predictions, wants from the rest of the book?
No, I think we're good. I'm so excited. I'm so ready for this.
I can tell you, dude, right now, this is a very unique experience. I picked this book series because it's been one of my recent favorites and all-time favorites. And what's so interesting now to be in this final season talking about, or not final season, but the kind of final stretch talking about this last published book, is that I don't think that there will be a point in any of the rest of the book series that we're planning on reading where I won't know the ending in advance. But right now, I'm kind of just exposing you to the shit that I know. And now I'm also making guesses with you. It's kind of it's a tough place to be in.
No, it's a great place to be in, Crossland. Like, why would you never want to be in this position? Like,
don't turn that evil at me. You have to wait as long as I do for the resolution to this. So it's even worse because I've had to reread it. Just kidding. It's been great. But I just wanted to bring that up because I think about that a lot and how this is kind of a unique situation. And we're not going to try to do these intentionally that way because I think that kind of... I like to think with the show with the end in mind to some degree because it'll let us paint themes a little bit better and more cohesively and coherently. Right. But that said, I could not fucking avoid the temptation that is this delicious, wonderful, bloodthirsty series that makes me cry at night sometimes.
Yes.
So with that, next week, chapter 18 through 25. It's 7 chapters. It's going to be pages 147 through 204 in the hardcover edition, first edition of Dark Age. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, of course, to our producers, Tim and Andrew, for helping us keep our show's lights on. Also, check out our links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, our websites, our socials, all in one convenient location.
Yeah. We also want to take a second today to thank our new patron, barback Aaron Mistrilli. Aaron, you kind of hit at a weird point where it took me 2 weeks to get to you because we had already recorded the last episode and we were waiting to record the next one. So thank you for your contribution in July so much. We're very excited to produce all this exciting content for our patrons. We talked about it in our patron exclusive bit of this episode, but we've begun to release a new little series where we're re-releasing episodes regarding Recursion, which was the second book that we covered while we were kind of practicing and figuring out our groove, and we are going to be releasing all of those old recorded episodes. I don't want to say remastered, but mastered for the first time, yep. And re-released to the public. So it should be a great time. And those will start being available. We'll be releasing them weekly on the Patreon. Very exciting.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to us. If you aren't already subscribed, make sure that you do. And we're stoked, of course, for the next section of this little book, and we'll see you next week.
See you then.